The mining shaft collapsed exactly as Howie had predicted, right on schedule, right where the geological survey said it would. What he hadn't predicted was the hollow sound his wrench made when it bounced off the debris, or the way the dust settled to reveal a perfect rectangular outline in the rock face. "Sue, you need to see this." His voice echoed strangely in the confined space, fingers already tracing the edges of what looked like a door. The metal felt different from the usual aluminum composites they used in the lunar habitats, heavier, older, with a texture that spoke of Earth's industrial past. Sue's boots clanged against the ladder rungs as she descended into the shaft, her headlamp cutting through the perpetual twilight of the lunar underground. "If this is about another one of your vintage Earth artifacts, I'm going back to the surface. The atmospheric recycler in Section C is making noises again. It's not vintage, it's..." Howie ran his calloused hands along the surface, feeling for release mechanisms. "It's sealed, deliberately." She landed beside him with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent half her life in 1/6 gravity, then froze as her light joined his to illuminate the marking etched into the metal, a simple star surrounded by 13 smaller ones, barely visible beneath decades of lunar dust. "That's an old Earth symbol," Sue said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Pre-contact, way pre-contact." Howie's fingers found the recessed handle, and something inside the door clicked. The seal hissed as it broke, not the sharp crack of explosive decompression, but the soft sigh of preserved atmosphere finally meeting vacuum. Whatever was inside had been waiting in perfect stasis. "We should report this," Sue said, but her scarred hands were already reaching for her tools. "The overseers will want to catalog anything from the old era." "Will they?" Howie asked, applying leverage to the handle. The door swung open on hinges that hadn't moved in centuries, revealing a corridor that stretched beyond their lights. Or will they just seal it up again and pretend it never existed? Sue's green eyes caught the reflection of their headlamps as she studied his face. 23 years of friendship had taught her to read the subtle signs. The way his jaw tightened when he was about to make a decision that would change everything. The slight forward lean that meant he was already mentally committed to a course of action. Howie: "They disarmed Earth 3 centuries ago, Sue. Took every weapon, every defense system, every piece of technology that could be used to resist." He stepped into the corridor, his boots echoing against metal flooring. But they never bothered to check the moon. The corridor opened into a vast chamber carved from the lunar rock itself, but lined with the same strange metal as the door. Rows of cylindrical objects sat in perfect formation, each one tagged with symbols and numbers that meant nothing to Howie, but everything to the part of his brain that recognized engineered precision. "Those are missiles," Sue breathed, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror. "Honest to God, Earth-manufactured missiles." Howie moved between the rows, his engineer's eye cataloging what he saw. The technology was ancient by current standards, all chemical propulsion and primitive guidance systems, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. Each missile was a work of art, polished steel and precisely machined components that spoke of a time when humans built things to last. "There's more," he called from the far end of the chamber. His light had found another door, this one standing open to reveal racks of smaller weapons, boxes of ammunition, and what looked like enough spare parts to keep a small army supplied for years. "It's like they were expecting a war." "They were," Sue said, her voice tight with the kind of fear that came from understanding exactly what they'd found. "The Cold War. I read about it in the archives. Earth's nations stockpiled weapons everywhere they could, including places like this. Secret bases, hidden caches, insurance policies against apocalypse." The implications hit them both at the same time. Above their heads, alien drones hummed through the lunar sky, their sensors sweeping constantly for signs of human activity beyond the approved parameters. The overseers maintained their watch from orbital stations, ensuring that humanity remained safely disarmed and compliant. "We need to seal this up," Sue said, but her hands were already moving over the nearest missile, checking connections and examining the guidance systems with the instinctive curiosity of a born mechanic. "Report it to the mining supervisors. Let them decide what to do." "You know what they'll decide," Howie said. They'll contact the overseers, who'll send an enforcement team to dispose of everything. Another piece of human history erased because it makes them nervous. Sue's wrench twirled between her fingers as she thought, the habit betraying her internal conflict. These things are 300 years old, Howie. Half of them probably don't even work anymore. But the other half might. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the mining operation above. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their lights, the ghosts of Cold War engineers seemed to whisper approval of what they were considering. The penalty for possessing weapons technology is deportation to the outer colonies, Sue said finally. No trial, no appeal. They just load you on a transport and you disappear. The penalty for being human used to be death, Howie replied, until we convinced them we were harmless. Sue's jaw clenched, a tell that meant she was wrestling with a decision that scared her. You're talking about rebellion, about actually fighting back. I'm talking about having options. Howie's voice carried the quiet conviction that had made him the most trusted engineer in the lunar mining operation. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity might have options. The alien drones above them continued their patrol, their sensors calibrated to detect the energy signatures of modern weapons, the quantum resonance of advanced technology. But the missiles in the chamber around them were older than the occupation, simpler than the algorithms that watched for signs of resistance. One test, Sue said, her voice barely above a whisper. We figure out if any of this junk actually works, and then we decide what to do with it. Howie nodded, understanding that she'd just crossed a line neither of them could uncross. One test. But as they began their survey of humanity's forgotten arsenal, both of them knew that one test would lead to another and another, until they were committed to a path that ended in either freedom or destruction. The chamber held its secrets close, but in the silence between their words, the future of human resistance began to take shape. The veteran miner's real name was Frank, but nobody had called him that in 20 years. He'd earned his title through simple persistence, outlasting 3 generations of lunar supervisors, surviving cave-ins that would have killed younger men, and maintaining the kind of institutional memory that made him invaluable to the operation. When Howie found him in the depths of Shaft 7, wrestling with a stubborn ore extractor, Frank's first words were predictably direct. If you're here to tell me about new safety protocols, I'm not interested. Been mining this rock since before you were born, and I'll keep doing it until it kills me. Actually, Howie said, settling into the cramped workspace beside the older man, I wanted to talk to you about something we found, something that might interest someone who remembers what Earth was like before the overseers. Frank's hands stilled on the extractor controls, his hazel eyes, deep-set and cautious, studied Howie's face in the dim light of the work lamps. Depends what you found, and more importantly, depends what you plan to do with it. The young tech, Danny, though his nervous energy made the formal name seem too substantial, was easier to convince and harder to trust. Howie found him in the communication center, hunched over a bank of displays showing the constant stream of data flowing between the lunar operation and Earth. Danny's fingers danced across interfaces with the fluid grace of someone who'd grown up with technology as an extension of his thoughts. You want me to what? Danny's voice cracked slightly, betraying his age despite his technical expertise. Hack the mining sensors? Do you know what happens to people who mess with overseer monitoring systems? I know what happens to people who don't, Howie replied. They spend their lives on their knees, pretending to be grateful for the privilege of breathing recycled air. It took 3 days of careful conversations, subtle testing, and outright pleading before Frank and Danny agreed to meet in the abandoned section of the mining complex. The old tunnels had been sealed after a structural failure 5 years earlier, but Howie had quietly maintained access through a maintenance shaft that connected to the main power grid. Sue had spent those 3 days converting the weapons cache into something resembling a workshop. Her mechanical expertise showed in the way she'd organized the space. Missiles grouped by type and condition, guidance systems arranged for easy access, and a workbench improvised from spare equipment that looked like it belonged in the chamber. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," Frank breathed when he saw the first row of missiles. His weathered hands traced the manufacturing stamps with the reverence of someone touching a religious relic. "These are Titans, old Earth intercontinental ballistic missiles. I saw pictures of them in the archives, but I never thought." "They're real," Sue said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd spent days confirming that fact. "Real, functional, and completely invisible to current sensor technology. The Overseer's detection systems are calibrated for modern weapons. These things are so primitive they might as well be rocks." Danny's nervous energy had transformed into something closer to focused excitement as he examined the guidance computers. "I can work with this. The programming language is ancient, but the logic is sound. Give me a week, and I can have these systems talking to modern targeting networks." "Modern targeting networks that are monitored by the Overseers," Frank pointed out. "The moment you connect these things to the main grid, every alien within 100 million kilometers will know exactly what we're doing." "Not if we're smart about it," Howie said. He'd been thinking about this problem since the discovery, turning it over in his mind like a particularly challenging engineering puzzle. "We build our own network, isolated, hardened, using components that predate the occupation. The Overseers can't monitor what they don't know exists." The four of them spent the next week in the abandoned tunnels, working in shifts to avoid arousing suspicion. Frank's experience proved invaluable. He knew every inch of the mining complex, every forgotten passage and sealed chamber that could serve as a hiding place. Danny's technical skills bridged the gap between centuries of technological development, creating interfaces that allowed ancient weapons to communicate with modern sensors. Sue's contribution was more fundamental. She had the rare ability to look at a 300-year-old missile and see not just what it was, but what it could become. Under her guidance, they began the delicate process of refurbishing the weapons, replacing corroded components with modern equivalents, and upgrading systems that had degraded over the centuries. "The warheads are the tricky part," she explained as they worked on their first test subject, a sleek reconnaissance missile that had been designed for surveillance rather than destruction. "The original nuclear payloads are long since decayed, but the delivery systems are sound. We could replace them with conventional explosives or Howie prompted, "or we could get creative. The power cells from mining equipment, properly configured, could generate an electromagnetic pulse that would knock out alien electronics across a wide area. Non-lethal, but effective." Frank's scarred hands worked with surprising delicacy as he helped Sue remove the missile's guidance system. "You're talking about actually using these things, not just preserving them, but turning them into weapons against the Overseers." "I'm talking about having options," Howie said, echoing his words from the discovery. "For 3 centuries, humanity has survived by being useful and harmless. Maybe it's time to try being dangerous." The first test came on a Tuesday, in the deep hours of the lunar night, when the mining operation ran on skeleton crews. They'd chosen a small reconnaissance drone, one of the dozens that patrolled the lunar surface on automated circuits. The test missile was loaded with a low-yield EMP device Sue had cobbled together from spare parts, its warhead designed to disable rather than destroy. Danny's fingers flew across the improvised control system, his nervous energy channeled into precise technical action. "Target acquired, guidance systems online, propulsion." He paused, his hands hovering over the final activation sequence. "Are we really doing this?" "We're really doing this," Howie said. The missile launched from a concealed tube Frank had carved into the tunnel wall, its ancient propulsion system burning with a clean blue flame that spoke of engineering excellence. The guidance computer, updated with Danny's modifications, tracked the target with mechanical precision. The explosion was barely visible from their position, a brief flicker of light against the star-filled sky. But the effect was immediate and obvious. The alien drone's steady movement across the lunar surface stuttered, then stopped entirely as its systems failed. "Direct hit," Danny whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and terror. "The EMP took out everything electronic within a 50-meter radius." "And the drone?" Sue asked. dead in the water, or dead in the vacuum, technically. It'll take their recovery team hours to figure out what happened. Frank's weathered face showed the first genuine smile Howie had seen from him since the recruitment began. 30 years I've watched those things patrol our sky like we're prisoners in our own home. And now we know we can fight back, Howie finished. The question is whether we should. The silence that followed was broken by the distant rumble of mining equipment, the constant background noise of human industry that had provided cover for their rebellion. In the darkness of the abandoned tunnels, surrounded by the weapons of Earth's forgotten wars, 4 people wrestled with the decision that would define humanity's future. The overseers will investigate, Sue said finally. They'll want to know why their drone failed. If we're going to do this, we need to be ready for what comes next. What comes next, Howie said, is we find out how many more people are willing to stop pretending they're content with servitude. The cache around them held enough weapons to arm a small army, but armies were made of people, not machines. The real test wouldn't be whether the missiles worked, it would be whether humanity still remembered how to fight. The alien drones arrived 3 days after the test, their movements carrying an urgency that hadn't been there before. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colony's chief exobiologist, tracked their patterns from her laboratory in the main habitat, her analytical mind cataloging the subtle changes in their behavior. "They're searching," she announced to the small group gathered in the abandoned tunnels. Her wireframe glasses reflected the glow of her tablet as she displayed the tracking data. Random sweeps have become systematic grids. They're looking for something specific. "Looking for us," Danny said, his nervous energy manifesting as rapid finger-tapping against his thigh. "They know something happened to that drone. They just don't know what." Frank spat into the lunar dust, a gesture that somehow conveyed both disgust and resignation. "Been waiting for this day for 30 years. Figured it would come eventually." Elena's quick, bird-like movements betrayed her anxiety as she adjusted her glasses and pulled up another display. "The surveillance pattern suggests they're using some kind of anomaly detection algorithm. They're comparing current conditions to baseline measurements, looking for discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" Sue asked, her wrench twirling faster between her fingers. "Power consumption, electromagnetic signatures, thermal variations. Anything that doesn't match the expected parameters for a standard mining operation." Elena's voice carried the precise cadence of someone used to explaining complex concepts to non-specialists. "The good news is that our cache is deep enough and well shielded enough to avoid most scans. The bad news is that any significant activity will light us up like a beacon." Howie studied the display, his engineer's mind working through the implications. How significant is significant? Launching another missile would be detectable from orbit. Hell, just powering up the guidance systems for more than a few seconds would probably trigger their algorithms. The weight of that revelation settled over the group like lunar dust. They'd proven they could fight back, but the act of fighting would expose them to retaliation that would make the current surveillance look benign. "So we're stuck," Danny said, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who'd tasted freedom only to have it snatched away. "We have all these weapons, but we can't use them without signing our own death warrants." "We're not stuck," Howie said quietly. "We're learning to be careful." The next week brought new challenges as the heightened surveillance forced them to adapt their operations. Work in the cache had to be done in shorter shifts, with longer cooling-off periods to avoid creating detectable patterns. Elena's expertise became crucial as she developed early warning systems that could detect alien sensor sweeps and give them time to shut down their activities. But the real problem wasn't technical. It was human. The crew that had bonded over shared defiance began to fracture under the pressure of constant vigilance. Danny's nervousness escalated into barely controlled panic. Frank's skepticism hardened into outright pessimism. Even Sue's pragmatic confidence showed cracks as the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. "Maybe we should just seal it up," Frank said during one particularly tense planning session. "Pretend we never found it. Go back to mining rocks and keeping our heads down." "And let them win?" Danny's voice cracked with emotion. Let them keep us as pets forever? Better pets than corpses, Frank shot back. You think they'll just deport us if they find out about this? You think they'll be satisfied with sending us to the outer colonies? They'll make an example of us, Sue said, her voice flat with the certainty of someone who'd seen alien justice in action. Public execution, broadcast across the system, a reminder of what happens to humans who forget their place. Then we don't get caught, Howie said. Easy to say, Frank replied, harder to do when every move we make is being watched. The argument might have continued indefinitely, but Elena's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension. Her tablet was flashing urgent alerts, and her face had gone pale in the dim light of the work lamps. We need to shut down now. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from expertise rather than rank. Major sensor sweep incoming, full spectrum, high resolution. They're looking for something specific. The cache fell silent as they powered down their equipment and retreated to predetermined hiding positions. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, broken only by the distant hum of alien technology probing the lunar surface. When Elena finally gave the all clear, the atmosphere in the cache had changed. The petty arguments and personal fears had been replaced by something more fundamental, the recognition that they were committed to a path that led to either victory or destruction. How close were they? Sue asked. Close enough to detect any significant activity. If we'd been running a guidance system test, they would have found us. Elena's voice carried a mixture of relief and residual fear. But the passive shielding held. As long as we stay quiet, we're invisible. Staying quiet won't win us a war, Howie said. No, Elena agreed, but it might let us survive long enough to learn how to fight one. The revelation came 3 days later, when Elena's analysis of the sensor sweeps revealed something that changed everything. The aliens weren't just searching randomly. They were following a pattern, a systematic exploration that suggested they knew more about human activities than they'd previously revealed. They're not just looking for weapons, she explained to the assembled group. They're looking for signs of organized resistance. The pattern suggests they're tracking social networks, communication patterns, resource flows. They're trying to map the underground. Underground? Danny asked. What underground? Elena's smile was sharp with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a particularly challenging puzzle. The one that's been growing for 30 years. The one that's been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to give it a reason to act. The implications were staggering. If Elena was right, their small group wasn't alone. Across the lunar colonies, across the system, there were others who shared their desire for freedom, others who were waiting for a signal, a spark, a reason to believe that resistance was possible. How do we contact them? Sue asked. Very carefully, Elena replied. The same surveillance systems that are hunting us can be used to identify potential allies, but we need to be smart about it. One wrong move and we expose everyone. Howie felt the familiar weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. The cache around them held enough weapons to arm a rebellion, but rebellions required more than weapons. They required people willing to risk everything for the possibility of freedom. We start small, he said. Local networks first. People we trust, people who trust us. We prove that resistance is possible, and then we let that proof spread. And if we're wrong, Frank asked, if there's no underground, no network of potential allies, then we'll build one, Howie replied. One person at a time, one choice at a time, until every human in the system knows that we have options. The alien drones continued their patrol above, their sensors sweeping the lunar surface for signs of the resistance that was slowly taking shape in the darkness below. But for the first time since the discovery, the people in the cache felt something that had been missing from human civilization for 3 centuries: hope. The pilot arrived on a Thursday, riding the weekly supply shuttle from the main orbital station with the casual confidence of someone who'd never met a regulation he couldn't bend. Jake Torres had the kind of reputation that preceded him. Officially, he was a transport specialist with an exemplary safety record. Unofficially, he was the man you called when you needed something moved without attracting attention. "Heard you folks might have some cargo that needs special handling," he said, his shaved head gleaming under the habitat's artificial lights. His brown eyes held the gleam of someone who lived for the kind of risk that made ordinary people nervous. Elena had identified him through her analysis of communication patterns, cross-referencing flight logs with personnel files to find someone with the skills and attitude they needed. Jake's record showed a pattern of minor infractions and creative interpretations of flight regulations that suggested he might be sympathetic to their cause. "Depends what you mean by special," Sue replied, her green eyes studying the pilot with the careful attention she usually reserved for mechanical problems. "I mean the kind of cargo that doesn't appear on manifests and doesn't get scanned by customs." Jake's grin was infectious, carrying the kind of confidence that made dangerous plans seem reasonable. The kind of cargo that certain people might prefer to keep quiet about. The recruitment process had become routine by now, but Jake's integration into the group brought new possibilities. His access to transportation assets opened up options that had been theoretical until now. For the first time, they could think beyond the lunar surface. "Show him the test footage," Danny suggested, his nervous energy channeled into excited anticipation. "Show him what we can do." The footage was grainy, shot through a mining survey camera that had been positioned to capture the missile test. It showed the alien drone's steady patrol pattern, the brief flare of rocket exhaust, and the satisfying moment when the drone's lights went dark as its systems failed. "Oh my God," Jake breathed, his casual demeanor replaced by something approaching awe. "You actually did it. You actually took out one of their drones." "We disabled it," Howie corrected. "Non-lethal takedown, minimal collateral damage. We're not trying to start a war." "Yet," Frank added grimly. Jake's enthusiasm was infectious, but it also carried a dangerous edge. Where the others approached their rebellion with careful planning and measured steps, the pilot seemed ready to leap into action regardless of the consequences. His first suggestion was characteristically bold. "We should hit something bigger," he said, studying the cache with the eye of someone mentally cataloging payload capacities. "Take out one of their orbital platforms, show them we're not just playing games." "And show them exactly where we are," Sue pointed out. "The moment we launch something big enough to reach orbit, every sensor in the system will triangulate our position." "So we launch from somewhere else," Jake replied. "I can get us to any number of isolated locations. Asteroid mining stations, abandoned research outposts, places where nobody's been for years." Elena's analytical mind immediately began working through the logistics. The preparation time alone would be massive. We'd need to transport missiles, guidance systems, support equipment, the operational security requirements. "Are manageable," Jake interrupted. "I've moved stranger cargo for less important reasons." The debate continued for hours, but Jake's confidence gradually wore down their objections. His plan was audacious, risky, and exactly the kind of escalation that would announce their presence to the galaxy. It was also, Howie had to admit, brilliant. The target he'd chosen was a Class 3 orbital platform that monitored shipping traffic between the lunar colonies and the outer system. It was heavily automated, lightly defended, and positioned in a way that would make an attack from the lunar surface technically challenging, but not impossible. "The beautiful thing," Jake explained as he outlined his plan, "is that we don't need to destroy it. We just need to disable it long enough to prove we can. Send a message that humanity isn't as helpless as everyone thinks." The preparation took 2 weeks, with Jake making regular trips to scout locations and transport equipment. His cover story, routine maintenance flights to remote installations, was thin but plausible, and his ability to avoid official scrutiny was better than any of them had hoped. Elena's contribution was crucial in the final phase. Her analysis of the orbital platform's defensive systems revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited by a precisely targeted EMP burst. The challenge was delivering that burst with enough accuracy to disable the platform without destroying it. "Margin of error is less than 50 meters, she explained as they ran through the final calculations. Too close and we risk catastrophic damage. Too far and the EMP won't penetrate their shielding. Danny's upgraded guidance systems were their answer to that challenge. Working around the clock, he'd managed to integrate modern targeting algorithms with the ancient missile's control systems, creating a hybrid that could deliver Cold War-era hardware with 21st century precision. "This is it," Howie said as they prepared for the launch. "Once we do this, there's no going back. The overseers will know we exist, and they'll come looking for us." "Let them come," Frank said, his weathered hands checking the missile's systems with the confidence of someone who'd finally found a cause worth fighting for. Been waiting 30 years for a chance to look those scum in the eye. The launch itself was almost anticlimactic. The missile streaked away from the concealed launcher with a clean burn that spoke of engineering excellence, its guidance systems tracking toward the distant platform with mechanical precision. They watched through telescopic cameras as it closed the distance, a tiny spark of human defiance racing toward the symbol of alien authority. The EMP detonation was invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate and obvious. The orbital platform's running lights flickered and died. Its communication arrays went silent, and its defensive systems powered down in the face of electromagnetic overload. "Direct hit," Danny whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and terror. "All systems down. We did it." But their celebration was short-lived. Elena's monitoring equipment detected the response almost immediately, a swarm of alien interceptors launching from the main orbital station, their courses vectoring toward the platform's last known position. "They're not just investigating," she said, her voice tight with concern. "They're treating this as a hostile action, full military response." "How long do we have?" Sue asked. Elena's calculations were swift and horrifying. The interceptors will reach the platform in 6 hours. Once they confirm it was attacked, they'll start expanding their search pattern. If they trace the missile's trajectory back to its launch point, they'll find us, Howie finished. The next few hours were a blur of activity as they prepared for the inevitable. Equipment was hidden, evidence was destroyed, and cover stories were rehearsed. By the time the alien search teams reached the lunar surface, the abandoned tunnels looked exactly like what they were supposed to be, forgotten spaces in a played-out mining operation. But the game had changed. The overseers now knew that human resistance existed, that someone had both the capability and the will to strike back. The era of quiet compliance was over, replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and scrutiny that would make their future operations infinitely more dangerous. "Was it worth it?" Frank asked as they huddled in the cache, listening to the distant sounds of alien search teams scouring the mining complex. Howie considered the question, weighing the temporary victory against the permanent escalation it represented. "Ask me in a year," he said finally, "when we see whether this was the beginning of humanity's liberation or the end of our survival." Above them, the alien searchers continued their methodical exploration, unaware that they were looking for rebels who had already disappeared back into the shadows of human civilization. The war for humanity's future had begun, and neither side could afford to lose. The discovery came at 300 hours, when most of the lunar colony was asleep and the mining operation ran on skeleton crews. Elena had been analyzing the guidance systems of the remaining missiles, her analytical mind picking apart the ancient electronics with the patience of someone who understood that every component held secrets. "Howie, you need to see this," she said, her voice carrying a note of concern that made him abandon his makeshift cot and cross the cache to her workstation. "I've been looking at the manufacturing stamps on these guidance computers, and something doesn't add up." The others gathered around Elena's improvised laboratory, their faces illuminated by the glow of her screens. She'd managed to crack the encryption on one of the guidance systems, revealing layers of code that went far deeper than anything they'd expected from Cold War-era technology. "These aren't just targeting programs," she explained, her fingers dancing across the display to highlight relevant sections. "There's a secondary protocol embedded in the base code, something that was designed to activate under specific conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Sue asked, her wrench stilling in her hands. Conditions that match our current situation exactly, Elena replied. Human resistance activity in the lunar colonies, specifically targeting alien surveillance assets. The code is waiting for confirmation that we've successfully engaged overseer forces. The implication sent a chill through the group. Danny's nervous energy manifested as rapid pacing, his hands fluttering as he processed what Elena was saying. You're telling us these missiles were programmed to respond to our rebellion? How is that even possible? It's not, Frank said flatly. Those weapons are 300 years old. They couldn't have been programmed to respond to aliens nobody knew existed. Elena's expression grew more troubled as she pulled up additional data. That's what I thought too. But look at this. She highlighted a section of code that looked different from the rest, more sophisticated, using programming techniques that hadn't been invented during the Cold War. This isn't original Earth technology. This is something else. Howie felt a cold weight settling in his stomach as he studied the code. His engineer's instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong, but it took his conscious mind several seconds to process what he was seeing. It's a trap, he said quietly. The whole cache is a trap. What do you mean? Jake asked, his pilot's confidence wavering for the first time since they'd met him. Elena's analysis confirmed Howie's worst fears. The secondary protocol isn't just monitoring our actions, it's recording them. Every missile we've activated, every system we've tested, every tactical decision we've made, it's all being logged and transmitted. Transmitted where? Sue demanded. Unknown. The signal is heavily encrypted and routed through multiple relay points. But the destination codes... Elena's voice trailed off as she cross-referenced the data with her knowledge of current galactic communication networks. They're not overseer frequencies. They're something else entirely. The silence that followed was broken by Danny's strangled whisper. We've been played. This whole time, we've been dancing to someone else's tune. Frank's weathered face showed the kind of anger that came from a lifetime of being manipulated by forces beyond his control. 300 years they've been watching us, waiting for us to find this place, waiting for us to do exactly what we did. But who? Jake asked. Who has the technology to plant fake Earth weapons and make them look authentic? Who has the patience to wait 3 centuries for a plan to unfold? Elena's fingers flew across her interface as she accessed databases that required clearance levels she technically didn't possess. Her analysis revealed a pattern that was both elegant and terrifying in its implications. Not who, she said finally. What? These weapons weren't planted by aliens. They were planted by hybrids. The word hung in the air like a curse. Hybrids were the stuff of conspiracy theories and underground whispers. Beings that were supposedly part human, part alien, created during the early years of the occupation for purposes that nobody fully understood. Hybrids are myths, Danny said, but his voice lacked conviction. Stories people tell to explain why the occupation was so successful. Are they? Elena challenged. Think about it. The overseers arrive, they disarm Earth completely, and within a generation they have human collaborators who understand both species better than anyone should. How does that happen without some kind of genetic engineering? Howie's mind raced through the implications. If hybrids were real, if they'd been working for centuries to maintain the occupation, then the cache wasn't just a trap, it was a test. A way to identify potential resistance leaders and eliminate them before they could become a real threat. We need to assume everything is compromised, he said. Our location, our personnel, our capabilities. They know exactly what we can do and exactly how we plan to do it. So we're dead, Frank said with the resignation of someone who'd always expected the worst. They let us play at rebellion long enough to identify ourselves, and now they'll sweep in and clean up the mess. Not necessarily, Sue said, her mechanical mind already working through the problem. If this is a trap, it's one that depends on us following a predetermined script. What if we don't? Elena's analysis supported Sue's reasoning. The monitoring protocols are designed to track specific types of resistance activity. If we change the script, if we do something unexpected, we might just break their system. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their precarious situation. They had been pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. their every act of defiance meticulously recorded and analyzed. The revelation that their rebellion was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated test by unknown hybrid forces was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet in Sue's words, there was a flicker of hope. A trap, by its very nature, had vulnerabilities. "What's the unexpected?" Howie asked, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his comrades. Danny, still pale, but now with a glint of determination in his eyes. Frank, his anger slowly morphing into a grim resolve. Sue, already sketching possibilities on a discarded data slate. Elena, her brow furrowed in deep thought, sifting through the layers of alien and human code. "If they're looking for a specific type of resistance," Elena began, "then they've likely modeled our responses based on historical human rebellions, direct confrontation, guerrilla tactics, overt acts of sabotage. They expect us to escalate, to use these weapons to provoke a larger conflict." "So we don't," Sue finished, a slow smile spreading across her face. "We use them for something else entirely." The idea was audacious, almost insane. They had an arsenal of ancient missiles capable of delivering devastating EMPs, and their handlers expected them to use them to fight. But what if the true power of these weapons wasn't in their destructive capability, but in their ability to deliver a message not of war, but of awakening? "The secondary protocol," Elena explained, pointing to a section of the code on her screen. "It's not just logging our actions. It's also designed to transmit a signal once certain criteria are met, specifically the successful engagement of Overseer assets using these ancient weapons. This signal, it's not going to the Overseers, it's going elsewhere." "To the hybrids," Howie deduced, "a confirmation that their test subjects are performing as expected." "Precisely," Elena confirmed. "But what if we hijack that signal? What if we send a different message?" The plan began to take shape, a complex dance of deception and technological subterfuge. They would still use the missiles, but not in the way their puppet masters intended. Instead of targeting Overseer assets for destruction or even disabling, they would use them as relays, as broadcasting platforms. Their new target wasn't an orbital station or a drone, but the vast silent network of human communication that the Overseers had so carefully monitored and controlled for centuries. Every comm-buoy, every habitat's internal network, every personal comm link, they were all conduits for Overseer propaganda and surveillance, but they were also the nervous system of human civilization. "We need a message," Howie said, "something that cuts through the noise, something that tells every human in the system what's really happening." Danny, surprisingly, was the one who came up with the core of it. "It can't be a call to arms. They'll expect that. It has to be a revelation, the truth about the hybrids, about the trap, about the fact that we're not alone in wanting freedom." Frank, ever the pragmatist, added, "And it has to be undeniable, something they can't dismiss as a rogue broadcast." Sue began modifying the EMP warheads. Instead of a destructive pulse, she reconfigured them to emit a precisely modulated high-frequency burst designed to temporarily override and reroute local communication networks. It wouldn't destroy anything, but it would create a momentary, system-wide vulnerability. Elena's task was the most critical, crafting the actual message and embedding it within the hijacked signal. She worked tirelessly, weaving together data fragments, historical archives, and their own recent discoveries into a concise, irrefutable narrative. It detailed the Overseer's arrival, the disarmament of Earth, the subsequent rise of the hybrids, and their centuries-long manipulation of humanity. It revealed the cache as a test, a carefully constructed illusion of rebellion designed to identify and control potential threats. But most importantly, it ended with a simple, powerful truth. You are not alone. They have been watching us, but we have been watching them. The game has changed. Jake's role was to deliver the payload. He would use his unparalleled piloting skills to position the modified missiles at strategic points across the lunar system, ensuring maximum coverage for the broadcast. It was a suicide mission if they were caught, but Jake, for the first time, seemed to have found a purpose beyond the thrill of bending rules. "This is it, then," Howie said, watching Jake prepare the first missile for transport. "The biggest gamble humanity has made in 3 centuries. Win or lose," Frank grunted, "at least we'll know we tried." The launches were staggered, timed to perfection by Elena's calculations. Jake, flying under the guise of emergency supply runs, delivered the modified missiles to their designated drop points. Each launch was a silent prayer, a leap of faith into the unknown. The overseers, still reeling from the previous EMP attack on their orbital platform, were on high alert, but their sensors were still calibrated for destructive energy signatures, not subtle communication overrides. The first missile deployed near the main habitat, its EMP burst momentarily silencing all local comms before flooding the network with Elena's message. Then another near the mining complex, then further out near the deep space communication relays. A ripple effect spread across the lunar colonies, then to the orbital stations, and finally through the vast, slow-moving interstellar network that connected humanity's scattered settlements. For a few precious minutes, the overseers' iron grip on information faltered. The carefully curated reality they had imposed for centuries cracked. Across the system, screens flickered, comm links buzzed with an unauthorized signal, and the truth, raw and unvarnished, flooded into every human mind. Panic erupted, not among the overseers, who were still trying to pinpoint the source of the unprecedented communication breach, but among humans. Confusion, then fear, then a slow, burning anger. The stories, the whispers, the vague unease that had always lingered beneath the surface of their compliant lives, they were all confirmed. They were not pets, but prisoners. Their defiance was not their own, but a carefully orchestrated experiment. And then the message, "You are not alone." The overseers reacted with predictable ferocity. Their interceptors, previously searching for a rogue weapon, now shifted their focus to hunting down the source of the broadcast. Enforcement teams swarmed the lunar colonies, their presence no longer subtle but overt and menacing. The era of quiet compliance was definitively over. But it was too late. The seed had been planted. The first signs of widespread unrest came from the outer colonies, where overseer control was thinner and human resentment ran deeper. Miners refused to work. Technicians sabotaged equipment. Small, spontaneous acts of defiance erupted, not organized, but fueled by a shared, sudden understanding. "They're reacting," Elena said, her voice strained but triumphant as she monitored the burgeoning chaos. "The message is spreading. The overseers are losing control of the narrative. And they're coming for us," Frank added, his hand resting on a newly refurbished missile. This one, unlike the others, still contained a conventional explosive payload. Howie knew this was the moment of truth. They had exposed the trap, but they were still in it. The hybrids, whoever and wherever they were, would now know their test had gone awry. They would likely respond with overwhelming force. "We need to move," he said. "Jake, can you get us out?" Jake, who had returned from his final perilous missile deployment, nodded grimly. "I've got a transport prepped. Enough for us and a few critical pieces of equipment, but we'll be running dark. No comms, no transponder, just a prayer and a lot of luck." As they gathered their few belongings and prepared to abandon the cache, a new signal flickered across Elena's screen. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A response. "It's from Earth," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "A coded burst. It's a message from the Resistance. They heard us." The message was brief. A series of complex algorithms that, once decrypted, revealed a single profound truth. "We have been waiting. The time is now. Rendezvous coordinates attached." The hybrids had been playing a long game, but so had humanity. The trap in the lunar cache wasn't just a monitoring system. It was a beacon, a challenge designed to draw out the most defiant among humanity. But what the hybrids hadn't accounted for was the resilience of the human spirit, or the existence of a deeper, older resistance that had been waiting for just such a signal. "They knew," Frank breathed, a dawning realization on his face. "The original engineers, the ones who built this cache, they knew. They built this as a way to wake us up." The star, surrounded by 13 smaller ones, the symbol on the door of the cache, suddenly made sense. It wasn't just an old Earth symbol. It was the emblem of a hidden network, a secret society that had preserved the knowledge of resistance through centuries of occupation. "We're not just running," Howie said, a new fire in his eyes. "We're going home to join the fight." Their escape was harrowing. Jake piloted the transport through asteroid fields and decommissioned orbital debris, using every trick he knew to evade the increasingly aggressive overseer patrols. Danny, hunched over a jury-rigged sensor array, guided them through the blind spots, his nervous energy now a finely tuned instrument of survival. Sue, ever practical, kept the ship's ancient systems running, coaxing extra speed from failing engines. Frank, armed with a relic of a rifle from the cache, stood guard, his gaze fixed on the blackness outside. They jumped to FTL just as an overseer cruiser locked onto their position, the sudden lurch throwing them back into their seats. When they emerged from warp space, they were no longer in the familiar lunar system, but in the deep void, heading towards the coordinates Elena had decrypted. The rendezvous point was a gas giant, its swirling clouds a canvas of reds and oranges. As they approached, a small, stealth-modified vessel emerged from the atmospheric haze. It was sleek, advanced, but bore the same ancient Earth symbol that marked the lunar cache. A comm channel opened, the voice on the other end calm, authoritative, and distinctly human. "Welcome home, Resistance. We've been expecting you." The leader of the Earth Resistance was a woman named Commander Anya Sharma, her face etched with the weariness of a long, secret war, but her eyes burning with an unyielding resolve. She explained everything, the true purpose of the lunar cache, the centuries-long game of cat and mouse with the hybrids, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would find the cache and trigger the awakening. The hybrids, Anya explained, are not simply overseer collaborators. They are a third faction, born of early unsanctioned genetic experiments by a rogue human faction seeking to bridge the gap with the overseers. They believed they could guide humanity's evolution, make us more acceptable to the aliens. But their methods were ruthless, their ambition absolute. They became the overseers' most effective enforcers and our most insidious enemy. The lunar cache, it turned out, was an ancient failsafe designed by the last remnants of Earth's true defenders. It was a test, yes, but not for the hybrids. It was a test for humanity itself. A way to identify those who still possessed the spark of defiance, the will to fight for freedom. The trap was a filter, designed to weed out the weak and identify the strong. "Your broadcast," Anya continued, "was the signal we've been waiting for. It confirmed that humanity still remembers how to fight. It woke up countless others who were just waiting for a reason to believe." The war that followed was unlike anything the overseers or the hybrids had anticipated. It wasn't a conventional conflict of fleets and armies, but a decentralized, system-wide uprising. The message had spread, igniting pockets of resistance in every human colony, every orbital station. Miners, engineers, scientists, pilots, ordinary people who had been living under the illusion of peace now rose up, using their intimate knowledge of the overseer's systems against them. Howie, Sue, Frank, Danny, Elena, and Jake became key figures in the burgeoning rebellion. Howie's engineering genius was instrumental in adapting ancient Earth technology for modern warfare and communication. Sue's mechanical prowess kept their ragtag fleet operational. Danny's hacking skills became legendary, disrupting overseer networks and feeding intelligence to the resistance. Frank became a mentor, his decades of experience in the shadows invaluable. Elena's analytical mind was crucial in deciphering hybrid strategies and predicting their movements. And Jake, with his daring piloting, became the spearhead of countless daring raids. The hybrids, for all their centuries of planning, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't predict, a humanity that had finally remembered its own strength. Their sophisticated monitoring systems, designed to track predictable resistance, were overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of a truly awakened species. The final confrontation came not with a bang, but with a whisper. The Resistance, having learned from the hybrids' own tactics, launched a massive system-wide disinformation campaign. They flooded the overseer and hybrid networks with false intelligence, conflicting orders, and ghost signals, sowing chaos and distrust within their ranks. While the overseers and hybrids were distracted by their internal turmoil, the Resistance launched their true offensive, not with missiles, but with information. They broadcast the full truth of the hybrids' manipulation, exposing their origins, their methods, and their ultimate goal, to fully integrate humanity into the overseer collective, not as equals, but as a subservient, genetically modified workforce. The revelation shattered the remaining illusions. Many of the human collaborators who had genuinely believed they were working for humanity's betterment turned against the hybrids. The overseers, a species driven by order and efficiency, were horrified by the deceit and manipulation perpetrated by their supposed allies. They had sought compliance, not enslavement through genetic treachery. The hybrids, isolated and exposed, found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts, against a newly awakened humanity, against their former overseer masters who now saw them as a liability, and against the internal divisions their own lies had created. The war lasted for years, a brutal, grinding conflict that reshaped the galactic landscape. Humanity, once disarmed and compliant, fought with a ferocity born of 3 centuries of suppressed rage. They reclaimed their worlds, their technologies, and their destiny, not through overwhelming force, but through cunning, resilience, and the unyielding belief in their own right to freedom. When the dust settled, the overseers had retreated, their empire fractured by internal strife and the unexpected ferocity of human resistance. The hybrids were largely eradicated, their grand experiment in human manipulation a catastrophic failure. Humanity emerged from the shadows, scarred but free. The lunar cache, once a symbol of a forgotten war, became a monument to the awakening. Howie, Sue, Frank, Danny, Elena, and Jake, the unlikely heroes who had stumbled upon a trap and turned it into a weapon of liberation, continued to serve, guiding humanity into a new era of self-determination. The galaxy was a vast, dangerous place, and humanity was still a young species in its grand tapestry. But they were no longer alone, no longer disarmed, and no longer willing to be anyone's pet. They had options now, and for the first time in centuries, the future was truly their own. The moon, once a silent guardian of Earth's forgotten arsenal, had become the cradle of humanity's rebirth.